Hello, everyone. Welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Himbar. And sorry, I apologize. I just got out of the shower and just trying to record this real quick. I didn't do a weekly update last week. My reading has slowed down extremely after finishing The Boy Became a Jackrabbit, which is my favorite read of the year so far. One of the videos I actually was able to come out with the past couple weeks was an interview with the author, which was very, very fun. I had a great time talking to Charles, and you should go check that out. That was just this last Wednesday. Um, and the Wednesday before that, I came out with a short only, which was about what, well, just a very brief look at what medieval libraries would look like. Um, so if you're interested in that, you can just go to my shorts. But in the past 2 weeks, only finished 4 books. I'm kind of getting back into the swing of things after this little slump, which is a slump not from reading bad things or things I'm not in the mood for so much, but because I read something book I feel like I should mention actually is because I read it because of Charles. Charles mentioned it, and that is The Man of Gold by M.A.R. Barker. I believe it came out in the 80s. This world is a tabletop role playing game setting as well, board game, stuff like that. So it started being created in the 40s. This author really put a lot of thought into the world and a lot of thought into the languages. I think it really stands as like uh, fantasy adjacent to Tolkien. Now, it is much more sword and sorcery esque than Tolkien was. It's coming from a different tradition, I would say, than Tolkien was. Which is very British, kind of epic fantasy prose romance thing. Mayar Barker definitely seems to be more pulp. It's got a science fantasy flair to it. It's very different, though. The book itself is kind of okay, but I really enjoyed it still. It was very interesting. There are 5 books in the series. I think 2 that came out in the 80s and then 3 that came out in the aughts. But um, from different publishers, but they're not connected as far as I'm aware. At least I know book 2 is not connected to book 1. Definitely very interesting with like the names, just it's very South Asian, Southeast Asian inspired, um, but it is fun. I enjoyed it. I'm glad I read it. Again, didn't blow me away. I think if I hadn't read a lot of books, kind of already like this, then I think it would have. Like I'd read this when I was younger. I think it might have been a favorite. So I very much enjoyed that. You should go check out The Man of Gold. I also finished Finder's Bane by Kate Novak and Jeff Grubb. The final volume in Harper's. I have a video coming out on the Harper's now um, on Wednesday to talk about all those books. Um, so check that out. I enjoyed this one. It was very interesting. You get a look at like Sigil from Planescape, as well as there's a Nautiloid from Spelljammer, which I was not expecting. It's a very strictly forgotten Holmes novel for the most part. And deals with Bane. I always think it's interesting how often Bane pops up after he dies and before he's like fully resurrected. So those are the first 2 books I finished. I also finished The Fall of Ingwe, which is not really a novel. It's more of an audio drama. It's by Justin Rose, if I'm remembering correctly. He actually sent me a copy of this a couple months ago, and I forgot about it. And I was like, oh, let me listen to this. It's really well produced. Ingwe is the god of death, and he has some interesting character development, which you don't always expect from cosmological figures. And it's good character development, too. It's not like he's just going around sleeping with a bunch of people and things or whatever, like that type of cosmological happenings. It was interesting. And I enjoyed it. Audio drama is definitely not something I do that much. There was like an ebook version of it as well, but it's just a script. So um, I will have thoughts on it on my channel here soon. And then the last thing I finished was very short. It's also a reread, and is On the Ruin of Britain. I forget the Latin name for it, by Gildas. And I read this years ago. One of the first things I remember buying for myself on Kindle and like, wow, I want to read this. You know what I mean? Like I want to read this piece of this ancient text, right? This ancient history thing. I was a big fan of King Arthur even back then. And so that's kind of why I did it. I have been more of an Arthur kick. One of the books I have been reading. All right, well, real quick, I have been reading Music of the Troubadours. I forget who wrote it, but that is more, well, it's southern France, Aquitania. So, but that's been interesting to get to further into. And then, but I've been spending a lot of my time in Parzival by Wolfram von Eschenbach. And I'm making good progress through it, actually. I'm pretty far at this point, and I'm very much enjoying it. It is definitely different than Chrétien de Troyes' Percival, but it's a good continuation. I wonder how it would feel if it was in verse. I read Percival's Percival in translation, but a verse translation. This is a prose translation. I'm actually reading two versions too. So this version is by A. Hatto. Yeah, A.T. Hatto did this translation. But digitally, I was also I'm kind of in tandem reading this, and it's a different translation than one I have digitally, and it's by Mustard and Passage. I like their translation more actually than this Penguin Classics one by Hatto. But both are well enough. And I'm getting closer to the end, so we shall see. The other one actually has a bunch of, it's front loaded with like the extra material. This one is back loaded, so you get to page 412 and you get like more information on the poem. There's not really anything at the front though. The other one has a huge, pretty sizable section. Okay, there's a little intro forward actually, which I haven't read yet because I started with the other one. So I need to read the forward, and I'll need to read this stuff in the back too. But I have about 100 pages left, so I'm enjoying it. And then the next up on the Percival stuff is Perilous House. So looking forward to that one too. It's very interesting reading his medieval texts because they read really not the same in a lot of ways, but also surprisingly really similar. This is essentially a novel. Now, I would say it's in some ways not, because it's actually written in verse if you read the actual Middle High German. But the way I'm reading it here in translation and prose reads like a novel. In fact, I don't want to say it reads like a novel. It reads as a novel, right? It's a novel, essentially. And I think there was something actually that one of the editors talked about, how it's kind of like a silly, or maybe I was reading that in Arthuriana or the journal, that this idea that we get the novel in like the early modern period, but in reality we have several examples that are pretty much just novels that, are from the medieval period. And people just don't like to call them that for some reason. So anyways, so I finished those four things. I'm getting close to finishing Parzival. I did barely start as well Daughter of the Drow by Elaine Cunningham. I'm really enjoying it so far. She is already doing a way better job with the Drow than Salvatore has ever done. Way more nuance, way more interesting characters. Sorry, guys. That's what I expected from her dealing with the Drow. It still feels the same in a lot of ways, which is kind of disappointing. But I think would not disappoint like a Salvatore fan, like a Drist fan. But it feels way better. Like half the reason I just don't like the Salvatore stuff is just how little nuance you get with the Drow, and just how poorly they're handled. They're handled poorly. Like from a lore perspective, they're handled terribly. Okay. I don't know why Salvatore handled them that way. That's not the lore of the Forgotten Realms. And I'm enjoying much more how Cunningham handles it. Cunningham is a much more deft, much more an author I appreciate a lot more. So, and I've read how many Cunningham books at this point? 6, I think, and I've read like double that of Salvatore. So I've had a good tasting of both of them. So, and I also barely started Taliesin by Stephen R. Lawhead, mostly from T's recommendation. Now, Rin Fail did read these or reread them a couple years ago, and that brought him to my attention. But and then the Aurelia release that came out, I think just came out recently. Yeah, anyways, so Taliesin, I'm looking forward to getting further into that. I'm a few chapters in, like I'm on like chapter 3. I'm really enjoying it so far, but I'm very not far into it. So anyways, let me know what you've been reading. We'll see what else I get done here in the coming weeks. I mean, I'm still hard at work on translation, always am. I'm actually pretty close to finishing the Annunciation translation, and then you'll get that on the other channel on the 23rd, so that's coming up. Yeah, so that's exciting. That's only 2 weeks from tomorrow, so I need to finish it up. Anyways, thanks for watching.